My name is Hannah, and I'm going to tell you how my life changed on my first wedding anniversary. At the time, I lived with my husband Adam in a small apartment in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. Our life seemed perfect to others, but the reality was very different. Adam and I had met 2 years earlier at an opening at the art gallery where I worked. He was charming, caring, and our first months together had been like a dream. But little by little, things changed. Adam had become distant, sometimes even cruel in his words. I often found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do something that might upset him. Still, when Adam told me he wanted to do something special for our anniversary, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe all was not lost, maybe he really wanted to save our relationship. He suggested a romantic getaway near the Harrison waterfalls in the Jura, where we had one of our memorable first dates. On the day of departure, we hit the road early in the morning. The atmosphere in the car was strange. Adam looked nervous, but at the same time, there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. He would glance furtively in my direction while driving, but said almost nothing. When the silence became too heavy, he simply turned up the volume on the radio. During the ride, I thought about our history. To the happy times we had shared, but also to the way things had deteriorated. I wondered if this weekend was really going to change anything, or if it was just a desperate attempt on my part to hold on to something that no longer existed. After several hours of driving, we finally arrived at the small village of Ménétruc-en-Joux, located near the waterfalls. Adam parked the car in the parking lot near the trail that led to the waterfalls. The place was isolated, surrounded by a dense forest of fir and beech trees. The fresh air and smell of nature instantly reminded me of our first stay here. "Shall we take a little walk?" Adam suggested with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. I nodded, hoping that this moment together would bring us closer together. We began walking along the trail, the sound of the flowing water getting louder and louder as we approached the waterfalls. The scenery was beautiful, with sunlight filtering through the trees and reflecting off the crystal clear water. Still, I couldn't completely relax. Something about Adam's attitude bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When we reached the edge of the main waterfall, Adam stopped and turned to me. His face had changed. It was no longer the warm smile he had displayed earlier, but an expression that I did not know from him. His eyes were cold, almost cruel. "Hannah," he said in a voice I didn't recognize, "you know, I've been thinking a lot lately." My heart sank. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I can't go on like this," he continued. "This life, this marriage, it's not what I want." I was in shock. "Adam, what are you talking about? I thought we came here to fix things, too." He cut me off with an icy laugh that made my blood run cold. "Make things right? No, Hannah. I came here to end things." Before I could react, I felt his hands push me violently. In a split second I realized what was happening, but it was too late. I fell backwards, towards the void, towards the tumultuous water below. The last thing I heard before my body hit the icy water was Adam's voice screaming, "Finally free, after a year of imprisonment." The shock of the cold water took my breath away. The force of the current carried me away immediately, spinning me around like a rag doll. I struggled to the surface, my lungs burning with the need for air. When I finally managed to take a breath of oxygen, I was immediately submerged again by a wave. For what seemed like an eternity, I was tossed around by the rushing waters, unable to regain control. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but amidst the chaos, a memory popped into my mind, my father teaching me to swim in the lake near our childhood home in Annecy. "Don't be afraid of the water, my little Hannah," he said. "Let it carry you. Breathe calmly and let your body float." Guided by this memory, I managed to calm my breathing and let myself be carried by the current rather than fighting against it. Little by little, I managed to move towards the edge of the river. After what seemed like an eternity, my feet finally touched the rocky bottom. Exhausted, bruised, I pulled myself up onto the bank. My clothes were soaked and torn, my body covered in bruises and cuts. I collapsed to the floor, panting, my heart still racing. As I caught my breath, the reality of what had just happened hit me hard. Adam, my husband, the man I loved, had tried to kill me. It was not an accident, not a moment of madness. It was premeditated, calculated. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, mixing with the river water still running down my face. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain that was tearing me apart from the inside out. How could I have been so blind? How could I not see the darkness that resided in the man I shared my life with? But in the midst of this pain, something else began to arise within me. A dull, burning anger, which little by little consumed the sorrow and the fear. Adam thought he killed me. He thought he was rid of me. But I was alive, and the thought ignited a flame of determination within me. I struggled to my feet, each movement painfully reminding me of my fall. I had to act, and quickly. Adam would surely verify that his plan had worked. I couldn't stay here. Despite the pain, I began to walk along the bank, getting as far away from the site of my fall as possible. I had to find help, but I also had to think about what I was going to do next. One thing was certain, the Hannah that Adam knew, the gentle and submissive woman, had died in that fall. In his place was born someone new, someone who would never allow himself to be mistreated again. As I trudged through the forest, my mind was racing. I had to disappear, make Adam believe his plan had succeeded. It was the only way to have the advantage. But how to do it? I had nothing on me, no money, no phone. Suddenly I heard the sound of a car in the distance. I headed towards the sound, hoping to find the route. After a few minutes of walking, I finally saw a small country road through the trees. It was my chance. I left the forest and stood at the side of the road, hoping that a vehicle would pass soon. I didn't have to wait long. An old Peugeot appeared around a bend. I waved wildly, and to my relief, the car stopped. A man around 50 came out, looking worried. "Madam, are you okay? Did you have an accident?" I quickly decided not to reveal everything to him. "Yes, I slipped near the waterfall. I need help, please." The man, whose name was Jean-Pierre, did not hesitate for a second. He helped me get into his car and took me to the nearest village, Morez. During the ride, I was thinking about my next move. I couldn't go to the police, not right away. Adam would have the advantage too easily. No, I had to disappear completely first. In Morez, Jean-Pierre insisted on taking me to the hospital, but I politely refused, claiming that I was fine and just needed to contact my family. He left me outside a small cafe in the city center, after giving me some money so I could buy something to eat and drink. Alone, I took a deep breath. Now was when it really started. I walked into the cafe and asked to use their phone. There was one person I could call, a friend I trusted completely, Clara. When she answered, I felt an immense relief wash over me. "Clara, it's Hannah. I need your help. Don't ask any questions for now, please. Can you come and pick me up in Morez, in the Jura? I'll explain everything to you, but it's urgent and it's a matter of life and death." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then Clara replied, "I'm coming. Text me the exact address. I'll be there in a few hours." As I hung up, I felt for the first time since my fall a sense of hope. It was only the beginning, but I was determined. Adam had wanted to destroy me, but he had failed. And now it was my turn to play. The journey to Morez seemed endless. Each bump in the road painfully reminded me of my fall in the Harrison waterfalls. But more than the physical pain, it was Adam's betrayal that burned me from the inside. How could the man I had loved, the one to whom I had entrusted my life, do this to me? Sitting on a bench in front of the cafe where Jean-Pierre had dropped me off, I waited impatiently for Clara. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange. Passers-by gave me curious looks, no doubt intrigued by my disheveled appearance and my still damp clothes. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw Clara's little red Clio park in front of the cafe. My friend rushed out, her eyes scanning the street for me. When she saw me, her face fell. "Hannah, my God, what happened?" she exclaimed, running towards me. I stood up painfully to greet him, grimacing from the pain. Clara gently took me in her arms, careful not to hurt me further. "It's a long story," I murmured. "Can we go somewhere to talk?" Clara nodded. I've booked a room in a small hotel not far from here. We'll be peaceful there. The journey to the hotel was made in heavy silence. I could feel Clara's worried gaze on me, but she respected my need for calm. Once in the room, I sat on the bed, exhausted. Clara took a seat next to me, waiting patiently until I was ready to speak. I took a deep breath and began to tell. The words came out like a torrent, unstoppable. I spoke to him about the gradual deterioration of my relationship with Adam, his increasing coldness, his attacks of cruelty. Then I told him about this fateful day, our romantic getaway which had turned into a nightmare. As I spoke, I saw Clara's face change from surprise to horror to anger. "That bastard," she hissed through her teeth. "Hannah, you need to go to the police. He tried to kill you." I shook my head. "No, not yet. Adam thinks I'm dead. That's our advantage for now." Clara looked at me, perplexed. "What do you mean?" I stood up and began pacing around the small room, ignoring the pain that radiated throughout my body. "If we go to the police now, it will be my word against his. He will say it was an accident, that I slipped. And who will they believe? The grieving husband or the wife miraculously returned from among the dead?" Clara frowned. "But you can't let him get away with this." "I have no intention of letting him get away with this," I replied, a new determination in my voice. "But I want to do it right. I want him to pay for what he did, and for that I need proof." I stopped walking and looked Clara straight in the eyes. "I need your help, Clara. I need to disappear for a while. Adam must not know that I am alive. In the meantime, I will gather everything I can against him." Clara looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "Okay. What can I do?" A feeling of relief came over me. Having Clara by my side changed everything. "First, I need a place to stay. A place where Adam will never think to look for me." Clara thought for a moment. "My aunt has a small house in a village in Oven. She almost never uses it. I'm sure she will agree to lend it to you if I explain to her that you need a quiet place to recover from let's say, a burnout." I nodded, grateful. "That would be perfect. Then I'll need you to collect some things for me from the apartment. Clothes, my laptop, important documents. But you'll have to be discreet. Adam must not suspect anything either." Clara took my hand in hers. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. We'll make him pay, Hannah. I promise." That night, lying in the hotel bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning, constantly replaying the events of the day. I saw Adam's face again, his cold eyes when he had pushed me. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the darkness that hid behind his charm? But amid this storm of emotions, one thing was clear: I could no longer be the woman I had been. The sweet and naive Hannah had died in the tumultuous waters of the Harrison waterfalls. In her place was born a stronger, more determined woman. The next morning, Clara and I set off for Oven. The journey was long and silent. I watched the landscapes pass by the window, trying to imagine the life that awaited me. How was I going to rebuild everything Adam had destroyed? Clara's aunt's house was in a small village called St. Nectaire, nestled in the heart of the Oven Volcanoes Regional Natural Park. It was an old stone building, with a slate roof and blue shutters. The place was picturesque, far from anything I had ever known. "This is where you will be able to rebuild yourself," Clara said to me, handing me the keys. "No one will come looking for you here." I hugged her, grateful for everything she did for me. "Thank you, Clara. I don't know what I would do without you. You're stronger than you think, Hannah. You'll get through this, I'm sure." After Clara left, I found myself alone in this unknown house. The silence was deafening. For the first time since my fall, I allowed myself to really cry. I cried for the life I had lost, for the love that had proven to be a lie, for the broken trust. But in the midst of my tears, I felt something growing inside me. Determination, iron will. Adam may have tried to destroy me, but he had failed. I was still here, and I was going to fight. The following days were difficult. Every movement reminded me of my fall, every sudden noise made me jump. But little by little, I began to regain control. I spent my days planning, thinking about my next step. Clara brought me my computer and some things from the apartment. She informed me that Adam had reported me missing to the police, playing the role of the worried husband perfectly. The thought revolted me, but I knew I had to stay calm. Patience would be my best ally. I began to gather evidence. I searched through my emails, my messages, looking for anything that might show Adam's true nature. I found photos of bruises that he had given me and that I had hidden out of shame. I compiled accounts of times he humiliated me in public, disguising his cruelty as jokes. Each day that passed strengthened my resolve. I was no longer the victim. I was a survivor, and I was going to make Adam pay for what he did. One morning, while I was having my coffee on the small terrace of the house, an idea came to me. Adam thought he killed me, but he didn't know that I was plotting his downfall. The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. I took out my phone and called Clara. "I need you to put me in touch with a lawyer," I told him. "A lawyer specializing in domestic violence cases." "Are you sure?" Clara asked me, surprised by my determined tone. "More than ever," I replied. "It's time for action. Adam thinks he's won, but the game has only just begun." As I hung up, I felt a wave of adrenaline rush through me. The fear was still there, lurking somewhere deep inside me, but it no longer controlled me. I was ready to face what lay ahead. That evening, sitting at my computer, I began to write my story. Every word I typed felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I recounted everything: the beginnings of our relationship, the slow descent into hell, the psychological violence, and finally, this attempted murder disguised as an accident. It was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I saw clearly everything I had been through. And I realized that despite everything, I was still here. I had survived. The fight for survival was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Truly alive. Adam had wanted to silence me, but he had failed. And now it was my turn to speak. The days passed slowly in the little house of Saint Nectaire. Every morning, I woke up with the same determination, to make Adam pay for what he had done to me. But I knew that to achieve this, I had to be patient and methodical. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One morning, while I was having my coffee on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the volcanoes of Oven, my phone vibrated. It was Clara. "Hannah, I have good news. I found a lawyer who is willing to meet with you. He specializes in domestic violence cases." My heart leapt in my chest. It was the first concrete step towards my revenge. "It's perfect, Clara. When can I see it?" "He can see you next week in Clermont-Ferrand. Do you feel ready?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready. It's time to act." After hanging up, I got to work. I had a week to prepare my case, to gather all the evidence I had accumulated against Adam. I spent the next few days sorting through emails, messages, photos. Each item I found brought back painful memories, but I didn't let it get me down. Every piece of evidence was another weapon in my arsenal. The day of the meeting with the lawyer finally arrived. I went to Clermont-Ferrand with my heart beating. The office was located in an old building in the city center. I was greeted by Maître Dupont, a man of around 50 with a kind look. "Miss Leroy," he said, shaking my hand, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. But I promise you that we will do everything to ensure that justice is done." Over the next few hours, I told him everything. My voice shook at times, but I didn't let the emotion overwhelm me. I showed him the evidence I had gathered, the photos of my injuries, the threatening messages from Adam, the testimonies of my friends who had witnessed his outbursts of anger. Maître Dupont listened attentively, taking notes. When I finished, he looked me straight in the eyes. "Miss Leroy, you have a solid case. But I must warn you, it will not be easy. Your husband will probably deny everything outright. He will claim that your disappearance was an accident, that he thought you were dead." I nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help. I want him to pay for what he did, but I want to do it the right way." The lawyer smiles. "This is exactly the right attitude. Here is what I propose to you. We will put together a concrete case. We will gather all the evidence, all the possible testimonies. Then, We will file a complaint for attempted murder and domestic violence." My heart sank at these words. Hearing someone else describe what I had experienced in this way made it all more real. "What next?" I asked. "Then we will let justice do its work. But I must warn you, it will take time. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready. I want justice, no matter how long it takes." Leaving Maître Dupont's office, I felt both exhausted and full of hope. For the first time since my fall in the Harrison waterfalls, I felt like I was really moving forward. Back in Saint Nectaire, I got back to work with renewed energy. Maître Dupont had given me a list of things to do: gather more evidence, contact former colleagues or friends who could testify to Adam's behavior, find medical documents attesting to my past injuries. Every day, I spent hours on the phone or on my computer. I contacted old acquaintances, neighbors, even members of Adam's family who had witnessed his behavior. Some refused to help me, afraid to get involved. Others, however, were relieved to finally be able to speak. One evening, while I was working late on my file, I received a message from Clara. "Adam is starting to ask questions. He contacted my parents to see if I had heard from you. Be careful." This message made my blood run cold. Adam was starting to have suspicions. I had to be even more careful. I decided to limit my communications, to only go out when absolutely necessary. The little house in Saint Nectaire became my fortress. The days passed, and my file grew. I felt like I was reliving every painful moment of my marriage, but this time I was stronger. Every piece of evidence I gathered was one step closer to my release. One morning, while I was working on my computer, an idea came to me. What if I could get a confession from Adam? What if I could get him to admit what he did? This would be the ultimate proof, the one that would tip the scales in my favor. I immediately contacted Maître Dupont to tell him about my idea. He was reluctant at first. "It's risky, Miss Leroy. If your husband finds out you're alive before we're ready, it could jeopardize the whole thing." But I didn't want to give up on this idea. "I understand the risks, Master. But think of the impact it would have on the trial. If we have a confession, even partial, it would change everything." After a long discussion, we agreed on a plan. I wouldn't get in touch with Adam directly, but we were going to try to push him into foul trouble. We were going to create a false trail, make it appear that someone had information about my disappearance. The following weeks were intense. With the help of Maître Dupont and a few trusted people, we put our stratagem in place. Rumors began to circulate in our old neighborhood in Paris. Witnesses claimed to have seen me on the day of my disappearance. Meanwhile, I continued to work on my case. Each day brought its share of discoveries, some more painful than others. I found photos of the two of us, smiling, happy. These images tugged at my heart, reminding me of the woman I had been, the one who believed in Adam's love. But I didn't let it get me down. These memories only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for all the women who, like me, had been trapped in a toxic relationship. One evening, while I was rereading my file for the umpteenth time, my phone rang. It was Maître Dupont. "Miss Leroy, we have news. Adam took the bait. He contacted one of our false witnesses, trying to buy his silence. We recorded everything." My heart began to pound. It was exactly what we were hoping for. Adam had just made a mistake, and we were going to exploit it. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking with excitement. "Now we're going on the offensive. It's time to file a formal complaint. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. It was the moment I had been waiting for Mo. NTHS. The moment when I would finally be able to face Adam, no longer as a victim, but as a survivor determined to obtain justice. "Yes, I'm ready," I replied in a firm voice. As I hung up, I looked out the window. The sun was setting over the volcanoes of Oven, tinting the sky red and gold. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. I had survived the fall, I had survived my injuries, I had survived the loneliness and the fear. Now it was time to take back control of my life. I went out onto the terrace, breathing in the cool evening air. Tomorrow would be the start of a new chapter. A chapter where I would no longer be the victim, but the actress of my own destiny. Adam had wanted to silence me, but he had failed. And now it was my turn to speak, to shout the truth to the whole world. Night was falling on Saint Nectaire, but for me, it was the dawn of a new day. A day of justice, a day of truth. And I was ready to face it, no matter what. The day had finally arrived. After months of preparation, careful planning and evidence collection, I was going to return to Paris. I was going to fight Adam. I stood in front of the mirror in the small bathroom of Saint Nectaire's house, observing my reflection. The woman looking at me was both familiar and foreign. My hair had grown, I had lost weight, and my eyes reflected a determination I hadn't known before. I was no longer the Hannah that Adam had tried to kill. I was someone new, someone stronger. Clara was waiting for me in the car. She had insisted on accompanying me to Paris, refusing to let me face this ordeal alone. As we left Saint Nectaire, I took one last look at the little house that had been my refuge these past few months. I found peace there, but also the strength to fight. The journey to Paris was long and silent. Clara respected my need for calm, letting me mentally prepare for what awaited me. I reviewed in my head each step of the plan that we had developed with Maître Dupont. Everything had to be perfect. As we approached the capital, my heart began to beat faster. The familiar streets passed before my eyes, bringing back memories that I had tried to bury. I recognized the cafe where Adam and I used to have our Sunday breakfast, the park where we had first kissed. Each place was charged with contradictory emotions, mixing nostalgia and bitterness. Clara parked in front of the building where Maître Dupont had his offices. "Are you ready?" she asked me gently. I took a deep breath. As ready as I can be. In the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense. Maître Dupont explained to us one last time the progress of the operations. "Adam doesn't know you're alive yet, Miss Leroy. We'll first file the formal complaint. Then we'll summon him for questioning. That's where you come in." I nodded, feeling the adrenaline rush through me. What if he denies everything? Master Dupont smiles. That's where our evidence comes in. We have a strong case, and with the recording of his attempted witness bribery, we have what it takes to crack him. The next hours passed in a fog. I signed papers, answered questions, confirmed details. Everything seemed unreal, like I was watching my life unfold from the outside. Finally, the moment I both feared and waited for arrived. Adam had been summoned to the police station. It was time for me to go. Clara accompanied me to the entrance of the police station. She hugged me. "You're the bravest person I know, Hannah. You're going to make it." I thanked her with a trembling smile and entered the building. Maître Dupont was waiting for me inside. He led me to a small waiting room, explaining that I had to stay there until someone came to get me. The minutes passed slowly. I heard muffled voices, footsteps in the corridor. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Suddenly, I heard a voice that I knew too well. Adam. He seemed angry, demanding to know why he had been summoned. My body instantly stiffened, a wave of fear washing over me. But I forced myself to breathe deeply, remembering everything I had been through to get to this moment. The door opened suddenly, and a police officer entered. "Miss Leroy, it's time." I stood up, my legs trembling. Maître Dupont joined me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready?" I nodded, unable to speak. We entered the interrogation room. Adam was sitting from behind, facing two police officers. When the door closed behind us, he turned around. Time seemed to stop. Our eyes met, and I saw a multitude of emotions passing on his face. Surprise, disbelief, fear, and finally, cold anger that I only knew too well. "Hannah." His voice was barely more than a whisper. I took a deep breath. "Hello, Adam." The police officers began to ask questions, but I didn't hear anything. All I saw was Adam. The man I liked, the man who had tried to kill me. He seemed smaller, less intimidating than in my memories. Little by little, I started to hear the questions of the officers. They asked Adam to explain what had happened the day of our wedding anniversary. Adam Begayate contradicted himself. I could see panic in his eyes. Then it was my turn to speak. My voice was shaking at first, but as I told my story, she firmed. I spoke of the degradation of our marriage, psychological violence, and finally, from this fateful day to the cascades of the hedgehog. Adam tried to interrupt, to deny, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photos of my injuries, the testimonies of our friends and neighbors, and above all, the recording of his attempted witness corruption. Over the interrogation, I saw Adam collapse. His mask of perfect husband crashed, revealing the cruel man he was really. Finally, after hours of interrogation, Adam cracked. Okay, he shouted. I tried to kill her. She was going to leave me, she was going to ruin everything. A dead silence fell on the room. I felt tears run on my cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of relief. The officers got up to arrest Adam. As they passed his handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Hannah, he whispered. But I couldn't see any remorse in his eyes, only anger at being caught. When they took him, I seated, unable to move. Maître Dupont put a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Mademoiselle Leroy. You succeeded. I left the police station as in a dream. Clara was waiting for me outside, her eyes full of concern. When she saw me, she ran towards me and took me in her arms. Hannah, how did it go? I could not hold my tears longer. I was crying in my friend's arms, evacuating all the tension, fear, and pain accumulated in recent months. It's over, I whispered between two sobs. He admitted. Clara hugged me stronger. You succeeded, Hannah. You are so strong. That night, we stayed with Clara. I did not feel ready to return to the apartment I had shared with Adam. Lying in the bed of friends, I thought about everything that had happened. I had survived. I had faced my fears, I had faced Adam, and I won. The path had been long and painful, but I got to the end. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in months, I felt free. Adam could no longer hurt me. He was going to pay for what he had done. Clara offered to accompany me to the apartment to recover my things. I hesitated for a while, but I knew I had to do it. It was a necessary step to turn the page. When we arrived in front of the building, I felt my heart accelerated. So many memories were attached to this place, good and bad. But I was determined not to be overwhelmed. Upon entering the apartment, I was struck by silence. Everything was exactly as I left the day of our departure for the Hedgehog Waterfalls. It was as if time had stopped. Slowly, I traveled the pieces, bringing together my things. Each object reminded me of a moment of my life with Adam. But instead of hurting myself, these memories now seemed distant to me, as if they belonged to another life. Leaving the apartment, I felt light. I felt like I left behind it not only objects, but also the weight of my past. On the sidewalk, I turned one last time to the building. Goodbye, I whispered gently. It was not only a farewell to a place, but to a part of my life. Clara took my hand. Where do you want to go now? I smiled, feeling for the first time for a long time a real hope for the future. I don't know yet. But I know I'm ready to start a new life. While we moved away, I felt a puff of gratitude to my friend, to Master Dupont, to all those who had supported me in this ordeal. I had survived, I had defeated, and now I was ready to live fully. The sun was shining in Paris, and for the first time for a long time, I felt really alive. The future was uncertain, but it belonged to me. And it was the most beautiful victories. The days following Adam's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and activities. I found myself caught up in an incessant back and forth between the office of Maître Dupont and the police station, answering questions, signing papers, and trying to give meaning to everything that was going on. Despite exhaustion, I felt stronger than ever. Whenever I doubted, I remembered the moment when Adam had confessed. This memory, although painful, reminded me why I was fighting. One morning, when I took my coffee in Clara's apartment, my phone rang. It was Master Dupont. Mademoiselle Leroy, he said, her voice betraying a certain excitement, I have news. The prosecutor decided to continue Adam for attempted murder and domestic violence. The trial will take place in 3 months. My heart leaps. It was both terrifying and liberating. 3 months, I repeated, trying to assimilate the information. What should I do by then? For the moment, rest, replied Maître Dupont. We have a solid file. But there is something else I would like to tell you about. Several journalists have heard of your story and would like to interview you. It would be an opportunity to make the public aware of domestic violence. What do you think? I remained silent for a moment, reflecting on this proposal. The idea of speaking publicly about my experience was frightening, but at the same time, I thought of all the women who could be in the same situation as me. Okay, I finally said. I will do it. If my story can help even one person, it will be worth it. The following weeks were intense. I gave several interviews, telling my story again and again. Each time it was difficult, but I felt that it made me stronger. I saw in the eyes of journalists and readers awareness, compassion, and sometimes even the recognition of those who had lived similar experiences. One day, while I was getting out of an interview for a great female magazine, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart stopped when I read the contents. Do you really think you will get out like that? It's not over, Hannah. My hands were shaking as I showed the message to Clara, who had accompanied me to the interview. It's Adam, I said, the trembling voice. How did he have this number? He is supposed to be in pre-trial detention. Clara immediately took her phone. I call Master Dupont right away. The hours that followed were a nightmare. The police were alerted, my phone was examined, and additional security measures were implemented around me. But the damage was done. The fear that I had managed to overcome was back, tightening my throat like a vice. That night, unable to sleep, I got up and lit my computer. I started to write, letting my thoughts and my emotions dump on the screen. Over the words, I felt my determination strengthened. Adam wanted to scare me, to silence me. But I wouldn't let him do it. The next morning, I contacted Maître Dupont. I want to do more, I told him. I want to create an association to help victims of domestic violence. I want my story to serve something bigger. There was a silence on the other end of the line, then Maître Dupont replied, It's a great idea, Mademoiselle Leroy. I know a few people who could help you put this in place. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Between the preparations for the trial and the creation of the association, I hardly had time to think of the threat of Adam. I threw myself body and soul in this new project, finding a meaning and a goal. We decided to call the association New Departure. I wanted this name to symbolize hope, the possibility of starting again after crossing hell. With the help of Clara and some volunteers, we began to set up a listening line, support groups, and even an emergency accommodation system for women in danger. One day, when we were preparing the association's official launch, I received a call from a woman named Sophie. She had read my story in a magazine and had found the courage to leave her violent husband. Your story saved my life, she said, the trembling voice of emotion. I didn't know how to get out of it, but reading what you went through, I understood that I was not alone. That I could get out too. These words touched me deeply. For the first time, I fully realized the impact that my testimony could have. It was no longer just my story, it had become a message of hope for other women. The day of the launch of New Departure finally arrived. We chose a small room in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, a warm and welcoming place. Journalists were present, as well as representatives of other associations and even some political figures. Standing in front of the microphone, I looked at the crowd gathered. I saw Clara, who smiled at me with pride. I saw Master Dupont, who nodded as a sign of encouragement. And I saw faces that I did not know, women who were perhaps there because they needed help, or because they wanted to help in turn. I took a deep breath and started talking. A few months ago, I was at the bottom of the chasm. I had survived an attempted murder on the part of the man I loved, but I was broken, terrorized, without hope. I am here in front of you, not as a victim, but as a survivor. As I spoke, I felt my voice strengthened. I spoke of my experience, but also of all these women I had met since, their stories of courage and resilience. I spoke of our vision for New Start, our desire to offer not only a refuge, but also the tools to rebuild his life. Conjugal violence thrives in silence and isolation, I conclude. But together, we can break this silence. We can create a support and mutual aid network. We can offer a new start to those who need it. The applause that followed were deafening. People got up, some in tears. I saw women hug, men nod with determination. After the ceremony, while I was talking to the guests, a woman approached me. She looked nervous, almost frightened. My name is Leah, she said gently. Your speech. It made me realize that I am not alone. That I can get out of it too. I took her hands in mine, feeling how much they trembled. You are not alone, Leah. We are here to help you. You have taken the first step, and it's the most difficult. While I guided her to Clara so that she could speak to her privately, I realized that that was why I was fighting. For Leah, for Sophie, for all these women who needed hope and support. That night, when I got home, I felt lighter than I had been for a long time. Adam's threat was still there, somewhere in the back of my mind, but she didn't paralyze me anymore. I had found a goal, a reason to continue fighting. The trial was approaching, and I knew it would be a difficult test. But now I was no longer alone. I had new start, I had all these courageous women by my side. And together we were stronger than any threat. While going to bed that evening, I thought of the Hannah of a few months ago, the one that had been pushed into the tumultuous waters of the Hedgehog waterfalls. She had survived, she had fought, and now she had become a new one. Someone stronger, more resilient. The fight was not finished, far from it. But for the first time for a long time, I was considering the future with hope. Whatever Adam could still try to do, I knew I would never be alone in front of him. I had found my voice, and I would use it for myself and for all those who could not yet speak. Tomorrow would be a new day, a new fight. But I was ready to face it, more determined than ever. The weeks preceding the trial passed as in a fog. Between the preparations with Maître Dupont, the management of the association New Departure and the sessions with my therapist, I had little time to breathe. However, despite the constant bustle, I felt inner peace that I had not known for a long time. One evening, when I returned from a meeting with volunteers from the association, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My heart sank when I recognized Adam's writing. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and released a simple sheet of paper. Hannah, I know you think you have one. But don't forget that I know you better than anyone. I know exactly how to destroy you. The game is not over. Adam. I dropped the letter, my swirling spirit. How could he send me that? He was in pre-trial detention. Was it an empty threat or did he really have a plan? I immediately contacted Master Dupont and the police. They took the threat seriously, strengthening security around me and investigating the way Adam had been able to send this letter. The following days were tense. I jumped at the slightest noise, constantly checked over my shoulder. The fear that I had managed to overcome was back, threatening to get started. But in the middle of this storm of emotions, I found an unexpected force. The women of New Start, those I had helped and who had supported me in return, rallied around me. They sent me messages of encouragement, took turns to accompany me during my trips, surrounded me with a bubble of support and love. The day of the trial finally arrived. The Paris courthouse was imposing, its stone walls seeming to carry the weight of centuries of justice and injustice. I went to it accompanied by Clara and Master Dupont, my heart beating the chamade. Upon entering the courtroom, I live it. Adam. He was sitting there, looking calm and composed, as if he attended a simple business meeting. Our eyes met and I felt a thrill traveling. But this time, it was not fear. It was determination. The trial began. The lawyers presented their arguments, the witnesses paraded at the helm. I listened, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with anger, the story of my own life. Hearing other people describe the descent into the hell of my wedding, seeing the evidence accumulating against Adam, was both painful and liberating. Then came my turn to testify. Going up at the helm, I felt the weight of all eyes on me. I took a deep breath and started talking. I told our meeting, the happy beginnings of our relationship, then the slow degradation. I describe insults, manipulations, constant fear. And finally, This fateful day at the Hedgehog Waterfalls. My voice did not tremble once. I was talking with calm and clarity, looking straight ahead, refusing to meet Adam's gaze. When I finished, a heavy silence fell on the room. I could feel palpable emotion in the air. Adam's lawyer tried to destabilize me during the counter-examination, insinuating that I had invented everything to take revenge on a husband whom I no longer liked. But I was firm, clinging to the truth of my experience. The trial lasted several days. Every day was an event, but every evening I went home stronger, surrounded by the support of my friends and women of the association. Finally, came the time of final pleadings. Adam's lawyer painted the portrait of a loving man, victim of a tragic misunderstanding. Master Dupont, for his part, presented with strength and emotion the story of a woman who had survived years of abuse before brushing against death in the hands of her husband. Then it was the jury's turn to deliberate. The hours of waiting were endless. I passed them surrounded by Clara and women of new departure, drawing from their collective force. When the jury finally returned, my heart seemed about to explode. The president of the jury got up, his face serious. "We, members of the jury, declares the accused, Adam Lefevre, guilty of attempted murder and domestic violence." A buzzing fills my ears. I felt Clara hug me. I heard exclamations of joy around me. But my gaze was fixed on Adam. For the first time, I saw her mask crack. The reality of his situation finally seemed to strike him. The judge pronounced the sentence, 15 years in prison. Adam was taken, throwing me a last look that I could not decipher. Was it hatred? Remorse? No matter. It was over. Leaving the court, I was greeted by a crowd of journalists and supporters. Women I didn't know kissed me, thanked me. I lived tears in the eyes of some, and I understood that my victory was also theirs. That night, I couldn't sleep. Adrenaline still flowed into my veins, mixed with a feeling of relief so deep that it was almost painful. In the early morning, I got up and went on the balcony of my apartment. The sun rose in Paris, giving the city roofs. I breathed deeply, savoring the fresh morning air. For the first time since that day at the Hedgehog Waterfalls, I really felt free. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The media was closely interested in my story and new start. I gave interviews, participated in television programs, still in order to educate the public about the reality of domestic violence. The association experienced rapid growth. More and more women were contacting us, looking for help or offering their support. We opened new reception centers, so-called vocational training programs to help women regain their independence. One day, about 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from a woman named Amelie. She wrote to me to tell me that my testimony had given her the courage to leave her violent husband and file a complaint. "You showed me that it was possible to get out of it," she wrote. "You saved my life." These words touched me deeply. I realized that my suffering had not been in vain. Speaking, by acting, I was able to help other women to escape the cycle of violence. A year to the day after the verdict, I returned to the Hedgehog Waterfalls. This time, I was accompanied by Clara and some women from the association. Standing by the tumultuous water, I thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day. I had survived the fall. I had survived fear, pain, betrayal. I had faced my attacker and I won. But more than anything, I had found a meaning in my experience, a way of transforming my suffering into strength to help others. I took out from my bag a small box containing my alliance. I had kept it all this time, unable to get rid of it. But now it was time to let the past go. With a gesture, I threw the box into the bubbling waters. I watched her disappear, carried away by the current, as a symbol of everything I had crossed and overcome. Turning to my friends, I smile. "It's really over now," I said. "It's time to focus on the future." While we left the waterfalls, I felt deep peace spoke to me. The path had been long and difficult, but I had arrived at their destination. I was stronger, more resilient, and I found a goal that gave meaning to my life. The end game was over, and I won. Not only for me, but for all the women who were still fighting. And as long as there are women who need help, I would continue to fight, to speak, to act. Because each life saved, every woman freed from violence, was one more victory against those who thought they could reduce us to silence. The future was full of promises, and I was ready to face it, my head high and the heart open.